Norman stopped the car on the side of the road and got out to stretch his legs. The road was long and tiring, and Norman felt like he would fall asleep any moment. A short break was essential for him, since he had been driving for almost a day. He had less than 100 kilometers left to the village he was heading to, but they seemed truly endless to him. If it weren't for the business he had to finish there, Norman would never have driven so far. He used to live here with his grandparents. Then came the army, and after that, a new urban life and a job as a driver in the large company's fleet. There was also Connie, his first love. They dated for 2 years and planned to get married, but fate decided otherwise. Connie's parents categorically did not want Norman as their son-in-law and did everything to separate him from their daughter. They insisted that Connie go study in the regional centre, and they were not at all concerned about Norman's sorrow. People say that time heals, but it never happens quickly. Only with the appearance of Melissa did Norman feel that the wounds in his heart were gradually healing. Melissa was impulsive and restless. She always brought noise, laughter, and bustle with her, but Norman liked it. Each of their meetings was like a real volcano of emotions, and the epicenter, of course, was Melissa. Connie was different, smiling but calm and sensible. But why remember her if everything is already in the past? Norman stretched until his bones cracked and began to stretch his neck, turning his head from side to side. The sun was already setting, sending its last rays to the ground, and he noticed something shiny in the withered roadside grass. Norman took a few steps towards his find and saw a golden chain with a beautiful gold cross studded with precious stones that lay under his feet. He picked up his find and examined it, marvelling at its beauty and elegance. Then he got back to the car and, invigorated by the extraordinary adventure, he easily covered the remaining kilometers to the village. Norman's native house greeted him with silence and the musty smell of an uninhabited building. It was sad to walk through empty rooms that reminded him sharply of the years spent here, of his grandmother and grandfather, who loved their only grandson madly. Norman hardly remembered his mother, who died when he was very young. In his memories, only her hoarse cough arose, but her face seemed like a blurry spot. Even in photographs, he did not recognize his mother in a beautiful, young, tall woman, but his grandfather and grandmother were still like alive in his mind. Norman was lost in thought when someone knocked on the door. He went out to open it and saw elderly Mrs. Gilliam on the doorstep. "Hello, Norman." She hugged him. "Oh, I was wondering, is it you who came or not?" "It's me, Mrs. Gilliam." Norman smiled at her. "Have you come to visit the graves? Or forever?" the elderly woman asked, walking into the kitchen and sitting down at the table. "Not forever, Mrs. Gilliam," Norman said, filling the kettle with water. "I'm thinking of selling the house. Life is expensive in the city. There's not enough money. The salary is not great." "Oh, how sad," sighed the woman. "It's so good here. Peace, nature, people are all like relatives to each other, not like in your cities." "But there is no work here. How do you live?" Norman smiled sadly. "Like everyone else," the woman replied. "The main thing is not to be lazy, and it's good for children to grow up in the village. But why am I telling you this? You grew up here yourself, you know everything, and it's your business where to live. If you want to sell the house, then sell. There will be interested buyers. Not right away, of course. It's not a district centre here, but with time, and meanwhile you can take in some lodgers." "Lodgers here in the village?" Norman asked. "Well, there's this young woman with a child. She's been allowed to stay in Mr. McAuliffe's guest house in the yard, but there are no good conditions there,
and winter is coming.
I don't know. Norman shrugged. I wasn't thinking about lodgers. I guess I'll sell it after all, said Norman, and absent-mindedly pulled out the cross he had found earlier, which he had already forgotten about.
Wow, that's a thing,
Mrs. Gilliam exclaimed, unable to resist.
It's expensive, you can tell right away. May I see it closely?
The elderly woman put the cross in her palm and began to examine it closely.
Where did you get it?
She asked, admiring the play of light on the stones. I found it by the road today, Norman explained. Mrs. Gilliam screamed and dropped the jewellery, hastily wiping her hands on her apron.
Throw it away,
she advised Norman,
or take it to the church, but don't keep it for yourself. Do you hear me?
Why? Norman was surprised.
Don't you know? It's dangerous to pick up someone else's cross. You can take on all the sins of that person. You'll get sick, misfortunes will start to follow you, and who knows what else.
The elderly woman answered.
You're making it up, Mrs. Gilliam.
Norman brushed her off and put the cross back in his pocket. But the elderly woman continued to babble and told him all kinds of horror stories, trying to dissuade him from his rash act. When she left, Norman was not immediately able to push away the unpleasant thoughts that Mrs. Gilliam had planted in him, but then he laughed anyway, calming himself down. What nonsense! This is the 21st century, and superstitions continue to live on and multiply. Cross costs a lot of money. Who will call me smart if I refuse it? Oh, Mrs. Gilliam, what a fantasy! That night Norman couldn't sleep for a long time, but his thoughts were not about the valuable find, but about his home, his grandmother and grandfather. Memories of his childhood kept him awake, and Norman fell asleep only towards morning, calming himself with one single thought. He would not sell this house. He couldn't do it. He would not betray the memory of his ancestors. His heart became light and he fell asleep, content with the decision he had made. He spent several days in his hometown, preparing it for the cold weather. He mowed the grass, swept the yard, did some repairs and fixed the gate. Mrs. Gilliam came to see him all the time, bringing him something delicious, treating him to fresh milk. On the last evening before Norman's departure, she brought a woman in her 30s with her.
Norman, this is Lauren, she said. I've told you about her. Let her stay in your house for the winter. You live in the city anyway, and she'll look after the house. Don't worry, she's kind and good. She likes order and takes care of things. Everything will be fine, and you can work out the payment somehow.
I have a little money, Lauren said. If you, Norman, allow me to live here, I'll give you an advance. It's not much, but I'll earn more.
Lauren sews well. All our women come to her with their needs,
Mrs. Gilliam explained.
That's how she earns a living.
I see. Norman nodded and smiled at the embarrassed woman. Live for free then. Just keep things in order here and pay the utility bills on time, so I don't have to pay anything. Mrs. Gilliam clapped her hands.
And it's so nice of you. That's who I call a knight,
she laughed. No, Lauren blushed. It's embarrassing. I can't allow it.
Come on,
Norman waved his hand. I can see you have no money. I'm not a wealthy man either, and grew up among ordinary people. So I understand you. Come in the morning, I'll give you the keys and leave, and you'll live here. Lauren smiled gratefully at him and, overcome with joy, hugged Mrs. Gilliam.
That's fantastic news,
said the old woman, patting Lauren's shoulder.
And you, Norman, with your good heart, will surely find happiness soon.
Lauren had already left the house, but Mrs. Gilliam slowed down and, turning to Norman, whispered to him,
Throw away the cross. Listen to me.
Norman returned to the city the day before Melissa's birthday and she ran happily to him and threw herself into his arms. "My Norman, I missed you so much. So, did you sell your old house?" "No," Norman smiled, kissing the girl. "I didn't sell it. You know, I just couldn't for some reason. Memories came flooding back, and I couldn't deal with them. In short, I decided to keep it." "Norman?" Melissa said, disappointed. "But I thought... Tomorrow is my birthday." "Yes, my sunshine, I remember everything," Norman said. "But what does the house have to do with it?" "Well, I just wanted you to buy me a good gift, something nice. Let all the girls be jealous. Tom brought Molly an expensive new phone. Willie bought a golden bracelet for Sarah's birthday. And what about me? Am I worse than them?" The girl's eyes filled with tears. Norman thought about the new purse and perfume bottle that he had already prepared for her as a gift, but Melissa's words instantly devalued his efforts. However, when she mentioned gold, he thought about the cross and smiled. "Let's not rush things," he said to Melissa. "I think my gift will definitely make your friends envious, although I don't understand why you need to." "All girls are like that," sighed Melissa. "We want to have the best of everything, that's all." She paused for a moment, then asked again, "So you really don't want to sell the house?" "Maybe it's a mistake. We'll need money for the wedding." "I let a tenant in there," Norman explained. "Oh, well done," exclaimed Melissa. "How much will he pay?" "Nothing," Norman shrugged. Suddenly these questions became unpleasant to him, and he hurriedly changed the subject. "What time are your guests coming tomorrow?" "At 7, Melissa smiled. "And don't be late." Norman's gifts caused a real sensation. Of course, he decided to tease the girl and first gave her flowers, a purse, and perfume, watching with interest as Melissa's face fell. Yes, she wanted exactly those things, and had shown Norman these items in shop windows more than once, but now she was waiting for something more. And when he put a diamond-studded cross around her neck, she screamed with delight. The girlfriends surrounded the birthday girl and enviously examined the beautiful piece of jewellery, exclaiming in admiration. But when they asked Norman about its cost, he just joked and didn't admit that he found it accidentally. The evening was a success. Melissa was glowing with happiness, finally surpassing all her friends. When she was alone with them, she once again demonstrated the preciousness of the gift. "I think you're rejoicing in vain," Molly said sarcastically. "Where did your Norman get so much money? He's not Rockefeller, just an ordinary driver." "Norman works as a taxi driver at night," Melissa said, but the girls just laughed. "Yeah," Sarah laughed. "A taxi driver is so cool. Maybe I'll tell my Willie to quit his job and become a taxi driver. They must be richer than padishahs, giving away such precious things left and right." "Precious things?" Molly exclaimed. "Just ordinary jewellery. Maybe he bought it from the gypsies, that's all. Or maybe it's even a fake." Melissa even blushed with offence and anger. She was prepared to argue with her friends, but Sarah had a suggestion. "Go to the jeweller in the morning and have him evaluate the cross. If it's real gold and diamonds, I will be the first to apologise to you and Norman." "I will do that," Melissa said, narrowing her eyes. "And all of you will apologise to me. Got it?" She lifted her head high and returned to the other guests. Her friends had no choice but to follow her. Melissa could hardly wait for the morning, and as soon as the workday began, she hurried to the jewellery store. A handsome man in his 40s or early 50s greeted her. "What can I offer you, miss?" he asked. "I'm not here to buy," explained Melissa. "I would like to know whether this is a real thing or not. Who can help me?" "I can," the man replied. He invited Melissa to follow him to his office. On the way, she took out a box in which the cross and chain lay. When the door closed behind them, she handed it to the jeweller. The man's face changed instantly. At first he showed surprise, then confusion, and then a whole series of other, no less powerful emotions. With trembling fingers, he touched the cross and suddenly raised his hand, pressing it to his mouth, not allowing a cry of despair and pain to escape. Melissa could not take her eyes off him. She already understood that something was wrong and wanted to take her thing and run away. But the jeweller grabbed her by the arm. "Where did you get this cross? Where did you get it?" he demanded. "Let go of me, it hurts," cried Melissa, who was completely frightened. But he did not only not let her go, but dragged her to the couch and sat her down. "I repeat, where did you get this cross?" "My boyfriend gave it to me for my birthday yesterday. His name is Norman." Melissa burst into tears. "This is my cross. Give it back to me and I'll leave." "No, you're not going anywhere until you tell me everything," the jeweller continued to shout. "Call your Norman right now. Let him come here, or I don't know what I'll do to you." "I don't understand anything. I'm not guilty of anything," Melissa cried, waiting for Norman to answer her call. "Norman!" she shouted when he finally picked up the phone. "What did you do? Where did you get this cross?" "The one you gave me. They want to kill me because of it." Norman was stunned, hearing Melissa sobbing and screaming. "Wait, I don't understand what's going on, Melissa. Where are you?" At this moment, the jeweller snatched her phone away. "Hurry up and come here, or I'll call the police. Understand?" he hissed. "Where should I go?" Norman asked, suddenly becoming calm. If this guy is talking about the police, then he's not a criminal and can be dealt with. Within 10 minutes, he had arrived and was standing in front of the angry jeweller, looking him in the eye. "I found this cross," Norman told him. "I found it by the road accidentally. Now, will you tell me what is wrong with it?" "I made it," the jeweller explained, suddenly weakened and sat on a chair. "Both the cross and the chain belonged to my wife. It was my gift to her." "I don't understand," Norman said. "Was it stolen from your wife?" "No," the jeweller shook his head. "She disappeared a year ago. She went to the store and never came back. My wife was pregnant. Oh my God, if you only knew how I looked for her. I did everything I could, and even more. But she disappeared as if she were never in this world. We were supposed to have a son, my son. I loved her and my unborn baby too. We had a family, a real family, and now I'm alone. And worst of all, I don't understand what happened to her." The jeweller covered his face with his hand. Melissa and Norman exchanged glances. "What's your name?" Norman asked the man. "Seth." Norman introduced himself and his fiancée, then continued, "Don't think I'm lying to you, Seth. I really found your cross, far from here." Norman was telling the details, walking around the office in excitement. Suddenly his gaze fell on a portrait of a woman that was on the jeweller's desk, and he cried out, "It's her!" "Who?" Seth jumped up, like he was stung. "Lauren, my tenant. I let her into my country house. She lives there now with her baby." "Oh my God," Seth exclaimed. Let's go there right now." He rushed to the door, but immediately collided with Melissa. "Wait, what about my cross? I want it back," Melissa demanded. "Melissa, how can you?" Norman widened his eyes. "You've heard everything. It's Lauren's jewelry." "So what? I want it back. I don't care where you got it from, but it's my gift from you." Seth led her to the salon. "Here, choose any jewelry instead of the cross. Don't be afraid. This salon is mine. I own it and can make you such a gift." Melissa chose beautiful earrings and was very pleased with the exchange. although she regretted the exceptionally beautiful cross that no longer was hers. Norman suddenly felt ashamed of the girl's actions and turned away from her to hide the disappointed expression on his face. Seth didn't care and gave some instructions to the two saleswomen before hurrying out onto the street towards his car. "Let's go," he nodded to Norman towards his expensive car. "Wait, I can't do that. I need to ask for some time off work and everything." Seth sighed in disappointment, but had to agree. They left the city only in the evening. Lauren was putting her son to bed when she heard the gate creak and someone walking through the yard. The woman hurried to the door, asking cautiously, "Who's there?" "Lauren," Norman replied. "It's me, Norman. Please, open up." "Norman?" The woman was surprised, and when the door opened, she screamed, realizing that not only the owner of the house was in front of her, but also her husband. "Seth, how did you get here? Why did you come?" She pressed her hands to her chest. "Lauren, my dear, I was looking for you. You disappeared. I couldn't find peace. Why did you leave? Don't you know how much I love you?" The woman's lips trembled as she burst into tears. "I had seen your love. I came back home when you were there with Charlotte. You were kissing and didn't see me, but I saw you, Seth. I couldn't bear it, and that's why I left. My silly girl, Charlotte is nobody to me, and there was never anything between us. I didn't cheat on you, Lauren. She came to me and started kissing me herself, but I drove her away because I don't need anyone but you. I love only you and our son. Please, show him to me. Where is our son?" Norman, present at this family scene, felt improper and quietly left, giving the couple a chance to reconcile. He went to Mrs. Gilliam and told her about his adventure. An hour passed before they both came to Lauren and Seth, who were sitting holding hands. "So, what about the cross?" Mrs. Gilliam couldn't help but ask. "How did it end up by the road?" "I was pregnant when I left home," Lauren said. "I had little money with me and bought a bus ticket wherever it went. But I felt very sick, and I was vomiting all the time, and the driver had to stop a few times for me to get out. I didn't even notice how the clasp opened and the cross, which was heavy, slipped to the ground." "This is the most amazing story I've ever heard." Norman shook his head. "It's good that it ended well." Mrs. Gilliam smiled. "Well, and you said that finding crosses is unfortunate." He winked at her. "I was right a little. You've told me today that you've parted with your bride. Is that good?" "Of course," Norman exclaimed, "and I'm truly grateful to fate for showing me what Melissa really is. By the way, she wasn't even upset when I told her I was leaving for the village forever. She just called me a fool and added that she would find a better groom." "Well, and you'll find someone better." Seth patted his shoulder. "And I wish you to have such a real love as we have with Lauren." "I already had a real love." Norman sighed, remembering Connie. "Don't be sad, Norman," Mrs. Gilliam told him. "Happiness will find you here too." The next day they saw Seth and his family off, loaded with village gifts. "So you're not coming back?" Seth asked. "No," Norman shook his head. "I only now realize that I'm a villager. And you come to visit me. Fishing, nature. We'll have a great time." Seth promised to visit and warmly said goodbye. The next evening, someone knocked on Norman's door. He opened it and froze on the threshold. Connie was standing in front of him. "Norman, I'm here for you. Forever. I love you and can't live without you." Norman didn't say anything, stepped towards her and hugged her, burying his face in her hair, smelling of flowers and sun. Happiness finally found him. and it won't leave his home any more. Norman knew that for sure.